Well, welcome to JavaScript University. Thank you for coming. This is a significantly higher turnout than we expected for a free Eventbrite registration. JavaScript University, we're really aiming to be an open source hub for any sort of education related to the web. And of course, being on the web, it's hard to do anything without having JavaScript as a touch point. Our focus, and you'll learn this throughout the next deck, which is going to be actually the workshop, is that we are really aiming to get everyone ramped up to a modern baseline quickly so that we can do cool stuff on top of that and not have to worry about what libraries to use and and anything like that. And finally, we started in San Diego. It was just a bunch of us who got together. Each of us wanted to do something on our own. We organized into something that has become JavaScript University, and we're eager to take it several steps further. Who we are, just so that you know us by name. I am Jared Overson. I am a web developer who's been in the web for about 15 years now. We have Jess Carlos right here. You want to say something about yourself, Jess?
Hi, my name is Jess Carlos. I've been working on the web for 10 years, JavaScript about 9. I do a lot of jQuery stuff, and I'll be leading the jQuery stuff in the coming classes, so welcome.
I have John Cozen on the video back there. Do you want to pop yourself in front of the video camera, or are you going to stay back there? All right. Kia Jones, who's right next to Jess there.
Hello, I'm Kia, and I'm an interactive UI designer. Also been working with the web for about 10 years, but mostly HTML and CSS, a little bit of jQuery. I'm here just like you because I want to learn more about JavaScript.
And Chris Miller, right next to her.
Hello, I'm Chris Miller. I've been working on the web for many years now, primarily focused in JavaScript and PHP. That's me.
Eric Hall, our helpful Qualcomm host.
I facilitate getting rooms at Qualcomm.
Yeah.
And do a little bit of coding in JavaScript on the side for my work there.
Raphael's downstairs. He can't really speak for himself right now, but he's a hardcore Ruby guy. Knows a fair amount of JavaScript, and hopefully we can rope him into some stuff here. Patrick, where are you? Patrick. We added his name to the list. I'm not sure if he realized he was going to be up here.
Sure.
But.
Yeah, I'm a web designer developer. I do a lot of Ruby and Rails stuff. Also do a lot of front-end stuff with jQuery. And for my own personal interest, I run the SUU group. I kind of want to help out by starting San Diego JS and helping out with JavaScriptU. Just want to have more in-depth knowledge about JavaScript. I know a lot of stuff with jQuery, but it's all over the place.
Kevin Ball is not here right now. He is extremely busy. He is also the organizer for San Diego JS, excuse me. Instrumental in actually getting everyone together and is very supportive. And then San Diego JS, which we are all a part of at some level. Has anyone here been to San Diego JS so far? Oh, come on, guys. That was a pitiful showing. There's a presentation-based meetup the first Tuesday of every month. We usually have some pretty good speakers. There's a hack night next Tuesday. So for any more information on what we talked about today, then feel free to come to the hack night. It's in University Heights at 3rd Space next Tuesday. So I mean, ideally, it's going to be JavaScript on every Tuesday in San Diego. So if we start thinking that way, then we can do some cool stuff. What will you learn at any of the JSU here? And we're really aiming to make it really whatever you want. It's the audience that comes, we're going to try to tailor each successive class to you guys. So we're going to have a survey at the end of this. If it's not exactly ready now, then we're going to get it out to the mailing list tomorrow. So that you can provide feedback on what you learned and what you would like to learn in the future and anything that we could do better. And everything I just talked about is on the next slide. And we really are doing this because we love the web and we really want to give back. We want to strengthen the San Diego community, and every major advancement I've had in my own personal coding skills has been due to other people's code. whether or not they've actually been next to me or if I've talked to them. Learning from other people's experiences will skyrocket you levels and levels above each hurdle that you come across. And thank you. We'll get started to the main part now. Oh yeah. If you have questions, sign into Twitter now. Follow and message JavaScriptU with any questions as we come across. We don't have to raise hands. We got a board right here who's going to be monitoring the hashtag JSU and JavaScriptU. So any questions you have, just pop them onto Twitter, and they will either answer on Twitter, or if it's a relevant enough topic, then we will spring off into a side topic. So the first workshop is geared towards building the foundation of good web applications. And we are going to really work very hard to cram a tremendous amount of information into this workshop. Each one of these topics that we're going to talk about could easily be its own workshop, but the goal is to really establish that baseline so that we can move forward comfortably. You are going to find that you are either above this baseline or below this baseline based off of the feedback that we get for the surveys that we provide. We will know what to focus on, whether or not we need to take a few steps back, get people caught up to speed so that we can move on more quickly, or hell, if everyone's comfortable with the stuff that we talk about, then we'll just go on from there. We sent out a few prerequisites. If you have Node installed, then this is your last chance to actually follow along with the source code. I'm going to leave this up here for a few seconds, but the workshop source is the series of steps that we took in order to get the web app foundation that we're going to use for the subsequent classes. The web app foundation is going to be provided. This is just a chance for you to see each one of the steps as we talk about them, so you can see how the source code progresses. Does anyone want this up any further? Just raise your hand. Cool. Who had to sign up for a GitHub account for the prerequisites here? All right, cool. So we're mostly up to date with what GitHub is, why GitHub is so cool. GitHub for JavaScript, it seems like they almost go hand in hand just because, well, especially actually ever since jQuery deleted their entire plugin database, the GitHub seemed to fall in line with being the source for jQuery plugins. But JavaScript in general, it's the ultimate open source language for its entire history. You really had no choice but to distribute your source code with the client. So you really didn't have an option except to be open source. You could obfuscate your code, but that's barely security. We move on a little bit. Cool. So this is ideally what you're going to get. It's just an index page with the list of steps out. And as we go through, I will try to remember when we're progressing to the next step. It should be a relatively natural segue. So when I start talking about something new, just move on to the next step. Look at the code in your file, in whatever file editor you're comfortable with, or use the Chrome developer tools to poke around the source code. So the tools that we're going to be talking about, we're not going to talk much about Google Chrome because that's ideally most of you are using Google Chrome before this class. If you're not, then just get familiar with it, the developer tools. HTML5 boilerplate. This is a set of code and libraries that provide a pretty good solid foundation for HTML5 web applications. jQuery. Is there anyone here who is not familiar with at least the term jQuery? And don't be afraid. Let's all raise your hands. That's cool. No one? Awesome. All right. Well, that's probably going to be the next class because it is still so relevant. We're not going to talk about it much here because that's a whole can of worms. But we will talk about Less. Less CSS is a CSS framework, I guess you could call it. But it's an extension on top of CSS that provides a lot of evening of the rough edges of CSS. Twitter's Bootstrap, which is a style framework that you can use to build applications quickly and have them look relatively decent. Require.js. Who's familiar with Require.js here? Okay. This, I have a feeling, is going to be one of those foundation points that some people might be below, but this is a way to manage your dependencies and modularizing your code so that you get more reusable libraries. Jasmine, how many people have familiarity with unit testing JavaScript at all? How many people love raising their hands in settings like this? Ah, that's what I thought. So laying the foundation. HTML5 boilerplate, html5boilerplate.com if you're browsing around right now. This is the first step. Features of HTML5 boilerplate. It's this solid setup, and it basically provides you a lot of things that you're going to need to deal with anyway at some level. You can delete what you don't need, you can use what you do, you're going to have to change a lot of it, but it's basically a checklist. It includes jQuery just out of convenience, assuming that you're going to want to use it anyway. Modernizer. Modernizer is a library that aims to provide you the support to do feature detection without resorting to user agent sniffing. So rather than checking to see whether or not you're using IE 8 or 9 and then basing your site's functionality off of that, you will actually check to see whether or not an individual feature is supported. And outdated browser assistance. You use IE class tags. We have Chrome frame support. For those who are not familiar with Chrome Frame, that is a product from Google that allows people to essentially install Chrome within Internet Explorer. So for enterprise environments that rely on Internet Explorer, or you can't install other software, you can install Chrome Frame and at least get a reasonably up-to-date browser environment. So why a boilerplate? A lot of people hate the idea of using other people's code for good reason. A lot of the stuff in boilerplate is extremely simple. There's no reason why you couldn't have done it yourself. But why do it yourself if it is so incredibly simple? HTML5 boilerplate is designed in a way that makes it very easy to delete exactly what you don't need. There's a lot of stuff, just remove what you don't want. Modernizer is an HTML5 shim, so that we can use section tags, article tags, asides in IE 8 or below. Does IE 9 support that off the top of my head? I don't know. I stopped caring about IE a while ago. Google Analytics, it comes with a little snippet, Google Analytics. I mean, just when you're starting up a new page, like, oh yeah, I need Google Analytics, I almost forgot. Chrome Frame, delete that if you don't want it. Ensure IE Edge or Chrome Frame, that is one of the header tags. And that is something that I constantly forget, and without those, IE falls back to older rendering engines. That is a duplicate. IE tags. These are the conditional tags that we'll go over in a little bit, but it's just a list of cool stuff that we probably want to think about anyway. This is a list of the customized directory. If you're browsing along with the code, then you can take a look at what each of the file contains. The 404 is a very basic 404 page. I like to use it so that I can get something providing me 404 functionality without having to worry about the styling of the page right now. It includes the Google URL Finder. I'm not sure if that's the actual term for it, but it's a script that Google provides that gives you recommendations or suggestions on the page that you probably were looking for. The Apple Touch icons, these are the icons that show up on both iOS and Android. If you bookmark a web app from your browser to put on your home screen, is that a good explanation? We're going to move on, even if it isn't. Crossdomain.xml, it is a way to provide cross-domain access to from Flash applications. So it's something that you probably won't think about when you're developing your application, because the last thought that goes through your head is whether or not a Flash application is going to have to access it. But if you're developing an API, or if you have anything that might be reusable otherwise, this is just a reminder, hey, do I need to worry about this? Our CSS directory. favicon.echo, for those of you who aren't familiar, favicons are the icons retrieved from a browser when they view your page. So it's located at the root, and it's used for the bookmark or favorite icon in your URL bar or in your bookmarks or favorites. Humans.txt. It is just a text file that doesn't really do much, but it's a cool thing to have at the root of a website to just show you who the team was that built it. Really is not used at all, but it's a fun thing that you might want to add. Index.html, hoping everyone is relatively familiar with. Our JS directory, which we'll go through in a second, and robots.txt, which tells search engines how they are allowed to index our site. This is the original JavaScript directory that HTML5 boilerplate gives us. We have customized it because we are not too keen on the style there. We have it set up so that it's still in the JS directory. A lot of people are growing into the convention of using a scripts directory because you are no longer confined to just JavaScript, but we still use JS because I'm an old, crufty web developer. Main.js is a required JS convention. It is also significantly more meaningful than script.js. Script.js, it rubs me the wrong way for some reason. Script.javascript, it doesn't really mean all that much. It's like style.css, which they also do have here. The value of a vendor directory. This is really something that I try to adhere to because you really shouldn't be having other people's code alongside your code. It clutters everything, and the directory structure may sound trivial, but it's really, you can think of it as kind of an API to your brain. For every part that your brain needs to add extra to parsing to is wasted time. So if we can remove all the stuff that we don't need to visually take care of and throw it in the vendor directory, it'll make us code a little bit faster. Are people familiar with conditional comments? Relatively. They are these things right here. Well, actually, they're these things right here. They are only viewable from IE, I believe. They are wrapped in actual HTML comments, so other browsers can safely ignore that entire line. But IE adds special processing with the condition right there. So if less than IE7, we're going to get this. And if IE7, 8, or greater than IE8, then we get that. And it's kind of a cool way to provide specific functionality in a way that doesn't require up-to-date browsers from downloading extra stuff. So if we had styles or specific style sheets here, I mean, granted we have the HTML class right now because that's what HTML5 boilerplate does, but if we had style classes or extra JavaScript for IE7, 8, or 9, those wouldn't get downloaded from, they wouldn't get downloaded by more modern browsers, so it would just be reducing the payload that they have to work with. If we want to target IE6, then I mean, this whole line is for that, and it's going to be pegged with all these class names, so we'll be able to target it a lot easier. Node.js is added by default because if we have JavaScript, then we can take that away and replace it with JS. So if we view HTML5 boilerplate in Chrome 19, which you can all do if you're following along the source, this is what actually happens to that HTML class. You get a whole load of stuff that we actually support. So, like I was mentioning before, we do support JS, but granted, if you're using JS to do this, then you don't need to worry about that. We also get things that we do not support. Chrome 19 does not support any touch events, so this is a one way that we can use to feature detect rather than sniff the browser agent. Because I mean, if we sniff for Chrome greater than 16 or whatever, we're going to have a variety of things that may or may not be supported. This is IE8 after Modernizer. Notice all the no's. Notice how also it got pegged with the less than IE9 class. So if we want to have special styling in there for IE8 or below, it's relatively trivial now. And we get to see what IE8 does support. Hash change, local storage, session storage, font face. And these are just cool little, they're not critical to a web application. You could do all these feature detections yourself but Modernizer provides you with this and also provides you with a conditional loader. So you can test for each one of these and then have it load a shim if you don't have it, or another library if you do have support for things. So moving on to less. Any questions on HTML5 boilerplate before we move too far? I mean, again, we are slamming through a lot of these things, and I don't expect everyone to be completely familiar with everything. So feel free to dump questions on us. Anyone? Anything? Cool. So, less CSS it's an extension to CSS. It parses less files, which look very similar to CSS, and then it injects CSS in your page. It can be done both client side, so you include less.js, and it will gather up all your less files and inject them into the page, or you can compile it in the command line. Actually, if you do want to follow along with these examples, take down this URL real quickly. It is a live less editor, so as you're editing in one pane, it will be updating the actual CSS in the other. I'll give you a second for that. Any questions yet? No. So what is anyone familiar with us? I'm just going to stop asking. So variables we get with less. This is just incredibly useful. How many times in CSS have you repeated the same damn color or the same damn font size over and over and over again? And as soon as it goes back to design, they want to change it to a lighter shade of puce. And you have to go through and either grep or find all the locations of that color and inject it, or write your own pre-parser for your own CSS. You don't have to do it with less because it gives us that ability. And you can see here we've defined base color, font size, font family, and we've used them just as we would use their values in CSS itself. The next awesome thing are operations. You can see here we are actually adding a color to another color. So if we want to alter the entire theme of a site based off of one initial color, we can store that in a variable up top and then have color-based operations all throughout the site. Font size is an excellent example of why this is going to be useful, because chances are your headings and whatever other features on your site, they're all going to be based off of a ratio of your base font size. So this just makes that relatively trivial to implement. Mix-ins. Mix-ins, for the unaware of what that term is, it's basically an injection of code from another place. So you can see here the rounded border class that we've written in standard CSS syntax can be included in the bottom two classes relatively intuitively. Each one of those classes will get the contents of rounded border added to them. So if you want to have a certain class that is reused throughout your entire site, you don't have to add that class to each individual element. You can just add it to the class declaration within the less files. Parametric mix-ins, which, I mean, we're just getting crazy here. The less CSS, I feel like I can't evangelize enough. There are other alternatives, Sass and Stylus. They all do relatively similar things, but I mean, this is ridiculous. You can specify variables which can be passed as arguments throughout your entire site. So if you want to have a central border theme, but you're going to have variable border widths or variable border radii, then you can specify it in a similar way to this. And this just provides you a tremendous amount of functionality. And we'll see more of that when we get to Bootstrap. Color operations. So this is actually a little confusing. RGB and HSL are actually, they are features of CSS, so those aren't less color operations. But hue and darken are. Hue extracts the hue from a previous color and allows us to, again, have very dynamic or we can have themes based off of a central configuration, and then we can spin the colors around in different ways with these operations. visited anchor tags, all we're doing is darkening link color by 20%. Nesting. This is critical for maintenance of CSS and avoiding ridiculously long class names, or well, class declarations. I'm sure we've all seen the body h1 span button dot whatever class definitions, and those get quickly unmaintainable because as soon as you want to change one of those elements or those class names, you have to change it through each one of the declarations, and this is ridiculous. Here, this is going to be rewritten as you would expect CSS declarations to be rewritten, but they allow you to nest it in a much more intuitive way so that you're more likely to use these change CSS declarations instead of just trying to cut corners here and there. This will give you a lot more reusable code, and it'll give you the ability to use class names in a much more meaningful manner. You're not going to have obscenely namespaced class names like dot blog post dot focus dot whatever. So you can really name things what you wanted to name them initially. If we want to specify pseudo classes, I think they are, then we can just use the ampersand right here, and that'll append the following to the parent element. So that's just rewriting what we had on the previous slide into nested CSS. Oh, and possibly my favorite when I start to actually get into these is single line freaking comments. How many times have you wanted to just change one thing? Well, actually, that's a good example. If you wanted to just get rid of dot bordered, you had to do you have to wrap it in these block comments, which is ridiculous. You've got to go to the beginning of where you want, you've got to add 2 characters, you've got to go to the end as opposed to just the //. It's one of those things that like you start programming CSS and you constantly have to go back and wonder, there's got to be a better way. But no, there really isn't, and it's frustrating as all hell. The reasons we chose less for our foundation right now is, one, you don't have to do any extra compilation on the side. You can just use the client-side compilation in order to get started a lot easier. The client-side compilation on this and also Require.js, which we'll get into later, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, because it'll allow you to develop an entire application with client-side development, but as soon as you want to deploy it, you probably shouldn't be relying on the client-side parsing anymore, because that's just going to be a crap load of extra requests that we're not going to want to make, but for right now, it's excellent. And it doesn't do too much. CSS does have a lot of rough edges. It is extremely repetitive. We don't want to have to spend a significant amount of development time maintaining our CSS files. Less gives us enough to make that tolerable. And for your own projects, it really doesn't matter if you use less, but you have to use something. There's Sass, there's Stylus, there's I think Clojure or something or others. I've never used any of the Clojure stuff. Sass is absolutely excellent. If anything, I would prefer perhaps that Bootstrap was written in Sass for some features, but it wasn't, so we're using less because we want to use Bootstrap. So we really are using the best tool for the job. We're not trying to wedge Sass into a Bootstrap world because that's going to add a build step that we don't want.
Do you know why they chose less versus Sass?
I don't, but I mean the languages or the libraries, Stylus, Sass, and less are just so similar that it just.
It's probably because Sass originated in Ruby, so that's like Ruby dependencies.
Yeah, that's true. We actually use Sass for deck.js. Deck.js uses Sass, and rather than the client-side parsing of the library, you run Sass in watch mode, so it watches for any file to change, and then it parses that into the complementary CSS file. It's just that extra split second you have to wait for that compilation to happen that makes development kind of pain in the ass. And we can move on to Bootstrap. Has anyone actually used a project with Bootstrap? Got one, few. Is any one of you guys want to give a comment as to why you used Bootstrap? No, you're not interested in commenting, or? It's easier? Easier than what?
Then, well, I mean, it's all predefined, so you just lay out a container, a row, some spans,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how you want to lay out your
All the
page.
classes on there, the nice buttons and alerts and all those things.
Yeah, I think it's pretty damn cool. I was resistant at first because using somebody else's style framework just seemed kind of gross. But as I started playing with it, you really do come to the realization that almost every website you've ever come across is made up of the same sort of style elements. You got columns, you got grids, you got aligned elements. I mean, think about Facebook, you have very defined columns, you have individual blocks within those columns. It's not a far departure from what you're going to be doing anyway, it's just a structure around it. And it does have some cool styling for individual components that you will reuse over and over again. What site have you gone to that didn't have buttons or labels or any sort of notification concept? Bootstrap is really completely customizable, despite the fact that you can probably point out a whole slew of Bootstrap websites on the internet right now because no one actually does go through the effort of customizing. But the sites that do use Bootstrap and you can't recognize, you won't recognize as using Bootstrap because they've customized it too much. So it does have kind of a stigma associated with it because everyone recognizes the black nav bar, the stain buttons, a few other components. But you don't have to adhere to this visual style. It is more the structure and the style of their class names, so that you can reuse everything, and as long as you adhere to the class names and the structure, then you've got a pretty well-defined style document that is extremely extensible. So the CSS grid system, there are a few grid systems out there. One that I can think of is Grid 960, which I've used a project with, and it has it offers a little bit. I like Bootstrap a little bit more for the extra stuff that it does offer on top of it, and it is very well maintained. They just released their 2.0 probably a couple months ago. So I mean that's a pretty significant point for a lot of these frameworks is the maintenance. So CSS grid systems, you can set up as many grids as you want. Actually, we'll get to the variables later, but you start off with 12 grids, and you can specify blocks of any number you want. There's an example of 1, 4, 6, and 12, and it allows you to pretty easily define these elements in a very reusable pattern. If you want to offset things, if you don't want to have a giant block here, you just specify an offset. Responsive web design is the idea that your site should respond appropriately for the width or for the type of browser that is viewing it. So if you're browsing a website in a mobile device or a tablet, or if you shrink your browser window, you shouldn't be adhering to a minimum width where it makes the user scroll left or right, or it doesn't look good on a mobile device. So with Bootstrap, if we want it, we have the responsiveness baked in. If we do resize the previous page to a certain width, it will automatically collapse all of our spans into rows. And this may not be the ideal style if you were developing a mobile-first website, but when you don't have to think about it, having it do anything appropriate on mobile is a benefit. Any questions so far? Bootstrap? No. So this is the markup that you will probably start working off relatively quickly if you use Bootstrap. For those who are paying attention to the arguments that semantics are gospel when it comes to your markup, where the elements you use, the class names and IDs you use should be relevant to the content that they're containing. I am of the mindset that that only takes you so far, and when that gets in the way of maintaining or preventing repetitive code, then screw it. I mean, I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure that all my IDs and class names are relevant to the content if I have to have CSS and crazy amounts of CSS. So this is actually for those who aren't aware, maybe towards the ones and twos of the skill that we filled out. Dry, D-R-Y, is the concept that you should really adhere to not repeating yourself at all in programming. So if you have to write the same thing 2 or 3 times, you are doing something wrong. And it's not that you aren't coding, that your code will work, but as soon as you're doing a lot of repetitive things, the amount that you have to maintain starts growing damn near exponentially. So if you can do things that prevent the amount of duplicated code, then you are much better off than otherwise. So if we go back to the markup, we specify things in terms of rows in containers. I didn't show the container there, so this would be actually all encapsulated in a container. The rows define, I guess, the breakpoints between the spans inside. Here, the word span, I think, is very accurately chosen, but it kind of flies in the face of HTML writers because we have a span element. Span classes do not have to apply to the span element. You can use them with anything, and those just tell the browser that we're floating the content to the left, and we are having a certain margin and a certain width. So if we are running with the default width of 12 columns, then this is going to be one span of 4 followed by a span of 8. And down here we just have one span of 3. It will offset 2 columns. And Bootstrap has a lot of other components that it will give you, like buttons. And I'm sure what I was going back to before, when you see a site, you can instantly tell whether or not it is uncustomized Bootstrap by this button right here. As soon as you see that everywhere, you realize that somebody just downloaded Twitter Bootstrap and wedged it into their site. And it still looks good, but you're exposed as a cheater, essentially. Another beautiful thing about a lot of Bootstrap classes is that they are not strictly related to one individual element. So this allows you to get back to the semantics argument, to use the most appropriate element for your particular job. So if we have something we want the user to click on that is going to a document or a part of a document, then we should be using an anchor tag. If we are using if we want a button that we want the user to click on, where all we're doing is looking for a click element or something along those lines, and we're not going anywhere else, or it's not, if we're doing some Ajax on the side, then we really should be using a button. Span is just an overused element to begin with, so you can use it however you want. But this is important. Anchor tags, button tags, header tags, other things, they do offer those little bits of semantic pieces to your markup that make it easier to write code for and to see what your markup is really trying to do. Alerts. So on any site you've probably had to work on, there's had to be some way that you would present little pieces of information to a user that is not really, I don't know, is not worthy of a massive part of your site. There's just a little piece of text in line with some other stuff. Bootstrap gives you those pretty easily, and you can specify the colors in a very similar way to what you would have before with the buttons. And we have loads of jQuery plugins that they offer, and they are very, very small. They offer a fair amount of functionality, and to me, has anyone used a jQuery UI before? Yeah, that's a fairly common one. to me, Twitter, Bootstrap, and a lot of their jQuery plugins has really replaced a lot of what I would ever have used jQuery UI for. And to me, that's a good thing because it's really using more more forward-looking stuff. I don't want to crap on jQuery UI. I still think it's incredibly useful, but this has become my default, and then I choose jQuery UI if I need to do anything on top of it. And like we said, Bootstrap is written in less, so we get to do some pretty cool stuff when we embrace the two of them. There are Bootstrap customizers and precompilers. I think there might actually be one directly on Bootstrap's site that allow you to customize a lot of the variables and then download the compiled version. But if you actually start using the less files yourself, then you get all that, and you can tweak things willy-nilly whenever you want. So all the less files, you can see them broken down to things like the alerts we just talked about, buttons, button groups, and the beautiful one at the end, the variables.less, is a lot of the stuff that defines the overarching styles compressed into one file. So we can change the links and the font size and the font family and all these things from one file. And if we're using less, then we can do this on the fly in our development environment. If anyone's following along with the source code, I think this is probably the third one. But you can open up the variables.less file right now and change any of these files, reload the page, and see your styles propagate through all the rest of Bootstrap. And it's pretty cool, and I think it's definitely worthwhile. Now, if we were using something like Sass or styles on top of Bootstrap, it's just, it would add a separate step to the compilation process that for your particular web application might be relevant. For what we're trying to do here, it's not. Is that other examples of stuff we can change? So these are the button fields that you don't see a lot of people change.
Not to get off topic, but
no,
like,
please do. This is no, seriously, off topic. This is.
I love how this shortens the CSS. Oh, how do you feel about CoffeeScript versus into JavaScript, like less code with that as well?
I think CoffeeScript is awesome. I think it addresses a lot of shortcomings of JavaScript. I think I don't use it because the syntax is so far removed from what I'm comfortable with that it's that initial hurdle that I just haven't really cared about. I've played with it and I think it's excellent. I think that there are a lot of things that I think could be done to improve JavaScript but still maintain a JavaScript-y sort of syntax, and I would jump on that in a second. I used to be somewhat against it, just kind of my JavaScript fanboy-esque age, and then I realized that, I mean, I'm minifying my code, I'm uglifying my code, I'm using less to rewrite everything, and it's...
Same thing, I'm willing to embrace it.
Yeah.
You know, but it is hard to make the jump there.
Yeah, I think CoffeeScript's excellent. I don't think we'll be touching on it much because I do classify it as it's another language. And JavaScript, it can be seen as potentially like the
It's just,
the
I just
bytecode
thought
of
of
the
it
web.
because it's similar, like Sass would be compilable tiny, so you get that with CoffeeScript as well.
Yeah, does anyone actually use CoffeeScript regularly or play with it? I saw your hand up, almost. Yeah? You want to talk about it at all? Because I mean, there's a lot of people who have probably heard about it, but might not be aware of what it actually is.
So I find it a little more comfortable than actually like writing this pure JavaScript. So it helps a lot, especially only when I write like pure JavaScript files. If I'm actually trying to write JavaScript on a page, I find it helps on the syntax.
Yeah, I find that a lot of people who do like a lot of CoffeeScript come from a Ruby background, and the syntax is relatively similar. I love Ruby too, and for some reason I just can't get my head around CoffeeScript. But I'm deep in the bowels of JavaScript, so maybe I'm just don't want to peek my head out too much.
So I feel like I'm dissing JavaScript if I do CoffeeScript sometimes.
No, it really is excellent, and I encourage everyone to play with it and see if it does fit their coding style a little bit better. All right, well, moving on, everybody.
Are you using your phone?
No, it's just from work probably.
There were a couple of questions, just the Wi-Fi. This question as to whether or not less gets compiled client-side or server-side, and that was one of the reasons that we chose it for this, is that it gets compiled both. So you can use less in the browser, and it'll do everything. It'll pull in all your less files asynchronously, compile them, and inject it directly into the page. But come deployment time, you can run the less compiler and just deploy one single CSS file to production. So it's beneficial both ways. As soon as you want to start using it, all you do is include a JavaScript library, and you're off and running. Any other questions that were on the last few things? We've got HTML5 Bootstrap, less, and no, HTML5 boilerplate, less CSS, and Bootstrap. We're going to be moving on to more JavaScript stuff right now, so we have perfect time for styling and HTML5 related questions. All right, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and I, at least, am going to Carl Strauss right around the corner for food and drink afterwards, so if anyone wants to talk nerd around that setting, then come with us. So now moving on to JavaScript itself. Require.js. Require.js is awesome in so many ways. It's a departure from the way you may have normally written JavaScript before. It was written, back a sec. It was written in response to the deficiencies of writing JavaScript in the way that there's no real way to define your dependency list and have that be enforced with your application. So the way that I'm sure a lot of us have started writing JavaScript historically is that we would write these modules or libraries, include them as script tags, and then as your application grows, your script tag list grows, and then when you're refactoring and you want to move stuff around, you might not be certain that your dependencies are still in order, and you get weird errors that you don't find until significantly later. So Require.js is an AMD loader. AMD stands for asynchronous module definition, and all that means is that it is a way to write code in a way that is modular and can be loaded asynchronously. It is not a library, it's a specification, so Require.js is not the only AMD loader. There is curl.js, there's lab.js, I think that's still maintained. Lab.js actually, if I'm not mistaken, this is the one that will load all your AMD files and then store them in local storage. So your files will be cached in an HTML5 manner. The AMD specification really only defines the define function. And define is used to define your modules. These are in individual files and only takes 3 arguments. The first one is the ID. The second one is an array of dependencies, which are other IDs, and then your factory. The factory can be basically anything. It can be an object and you just get data sent back. It can be a function that sets up, well, it can be a function in the module pattern. I should have had something up here on the module pattern. When I say module pattern, does everyone know what I'm talking about? Just shake your head, nod your head. So a bit of nods. Hopefully I have something in here we can talk about the parts of it, so I'll go over it when we get to something that'll fit. Using an ID is not recommended unless necessary. The ID can be inferred from the file name, so you shouldn't be using IDs unless they're necessary. They will come into play later. So why AMD? I was talking about it before. Large applications without managed dependencies they're ridiculous, and it's amazing that we've come this far on the web and haven't really had much in the way of options until somewhat recently. We've had the YUI, which has had some sort of module definition and dependency implementation. This actually, I believe, AMD spawned I'm not mistaken, from Dojo, and I think that's also partially where require.js came from. But Dojo was another one that had a massive, it was a massive library, but also had the ability to write modules and dependencies. There are a few others, but historically what it came down to is that if you wanted to have some sort of dependency management, you had to buy into these massive libraries. And for a lot of people, you might not have wanted to buy into YUI or Dojo, you were doing something else. So this is an extracted portion that only handles the definition for modularity. And it's really, really is so important with JavaScript, and is so uncommon without using something like an AMD loader, is to have small bits of reusable JavaScript. How many people really have used massive utility libraries and have like a util.namespace and then a crap load of stuff underneath? Or maybe an application namespace and have like each of your application modules set up into these other gargantuan files. And you do that way because dealing with the script tags or the build process for these individual small reusable pieces is a pain in the ass. Like less, it is extremely easy to get started with. All it is doing is extending the module pattern and some other stuff, which we'll get to. But it is also usable in the browser much in the same way that less is. So you can require your initial entry point, and from the dependencies in that file and its dependent files, you can get your entire application up and running relatively easily. So this is what your new HTML will look like. It's relatively straightforward. You have your standard script source, and in this case we're including js/vendor/require.js. And you'll notice that we have added the require.js to our vendor library. But we also have this new data main. The data dash attributes are new to HTML5, and they are widely supported, partially because Firefox and Chrome are awesome and updated so frequently, but also IE supported arbitrary attributes for ages, so they are supported in older versions of IE too. That JS main points to our main.js in our JS directory, and this right now is what it looks like. It has a configuration, which is just a hash of values. We're only using the paths option right now. And the paths option allows us to define module IDs and the path that they point to. So we can have very intuitively named module IDs point to version files, min files, whatever else, so that when we're including things, we are only including it by jQuery and not the entire file path. So,
Can you set that to like any type of name?
how do you mean?
Like for jQuery, could you call it this, like for,
Yeah, you can call it whatever.
and special?
I mean, you'd be crazy if you did, but you can. Yeah. Yeah. So, whoop. This is the require in require.js. This is our entry point to our entire application. It's written in a way very similar to how the AMD modules are written. This is what require.js. This is how require.js, I guess, bootstraps your entire application. Curl.js would use curl. Some others would use some other name. So that's not part of the AMD specification. This is how we specify our dependencies. We pass them as an array of strings right here, which map to either files or predefined paths in our configuration. And what we get passed to our factory function are the required modules. So in this case, rather than having a global $, we are requiring jQuery, which supports AMD. This is not something that we're wedging jQuery into.
It's a 171.
Oh yeah, as of relatively recent version. And we are using the $. We could name it whatever we wanted, but we use the $, because that's just a jQuery convention. And then we use it just as we would jQuery otherwise. One thing to note, though, with a lot of the existing libraries that do support AMD, is that they define themselves as an appropriate module. jQuery does still register itself under some global namespaces, and that's required for plugins, for other widgets you might have that depend on that global namespace. So we'll get to other stuff later. So this is what a module written in A and B format would look like. It looks very similar to the required entry point, but notice the define right there, and that's defining this function as a module. I'm going to use that word way too much. This is our list of dependencies, and we get past each one of those dependencies, and then we use them however we want, and what we return is the usable portion of our module. So when we use this module in another module or the require, what we're actually using is the return value. So, oh yeah, cool. I mean, this will essentially be the module format. I forgot I went into this. So this is a more elaborate JavaScript definition. Call it 5 count because all we're doing is counting to 5. But you can see that we set up what essentially amounts to a private variable I. We've got a couple of very simple functions right here. A reset count, which just drops I back down to 0. Get count, which returns I. And increment, which pops 1 onto I, and then if we're over or equal to 5, we reset the count. What we return is the usable portion, and we expose increment and get count. So reset count is only used by increment, is not exposed to the outside world, so when we require or use 5count.js, what we basically get is an object with 2 methods on it. So this is how you normally would have written that module in the pre-require JS world or pre-AMD world. And you would basically just have a global variable 5count, and you would wrap it around and immediately invoked function expression. And for those who aren't familiar with how that actually works, you notice that we start with the parenthesis, end it right here, and then immediately execute it. So we've got a function expression, and all we're doing is immediately executing that. So we're going through all this, and the return of that execution is right here. That is what got set to 5count. And that is essentially similar to what actually happens when you define A and B modules. Any questions on this so far? I do recognize that a lot of these topics can be gone into extraordinarily more detail, but I'm hoping we're really nailing down the point that we're just trying to get that baseline. These are the tools that we're going to be using going forward. You are totally, perfectly normal if you do not understand a lot of the stuff that we've gone through so far. If you're at the 1 or the -7 portion of the skill spectrum, don't be discouraged by any of the stuff we're talking about right now. Sign up for the next workshops. We want to get everyone up to speed really quickly. We're not going to leave anyone behind. If you're having trouble, then come to the Hack Night next Tuesday. Come to the San Diego JS meetups. We generally talk about some cool topics there, but we have time afterward to talk about whatever we want. So we're really trying to get to a point where we can do some really cool stuff without worrying about what libraries are we going to use, whatever else. So don't worry about not understanding anything here. Just bring it up to us so that we know what we need to work on. So this is how we would use the 5count. We require the 5count, which would point to 5count.js, and we bring it in under whatever name we want, but in this case we use 5count again. And then we just call the exposed methods. It's relatively straightforward. It's not too crazy once we've gone through it. This goes back to the less blessing and a curse. You can use it from the client side, and it will asynchronously grab all these files, but as soon as you start getting into the habit of having these really small reusable pieces, you're going to have a lot of files. And when somebody comes to your site, you don't want to have 86 script requests going out before your site really does anything. But that's where RJS comes into, and it's similar in the way that Less has its own Less-C. It's node-based Less compiler. In this case, we would run RJS on our main.js. And provided we've written things in a particular manner, RJS will see our configuration, it'll know where everything is, it'll see the dependencies listed out by main.js, and it will grab and combine all your dependencies into one file. It will minify and uglify all your code, and not even just your dependent code. Any .js file in your entire application will be minified and uglified, and that's just an add a little bonus it gives you. I'm not getting too much into plugins with require.js. They are pretty huge, but we can leave that for another time. But it allows plugins to perform preloading work. So there are plugins that will grab text files. The text file plugin, when run via r.js, will automatically grab those text files and shove them into your resulting, I guess, main build main.js. And those are just more asynchronous calls that you no longer need to make. And this could be, this preloading work could be as complex as loading template files and then precompiling them into JavaScript functions, so you don't have to go through any of those extra steps there, depending on what is most appropriate to your particular application. And it minifies all your CSS because it's just a really cool script to have. AMD, it's different. You're going to come across issues that will have to be answered in a new way, and there might not be answers for them, or there might be a lot of different answers that you're going to have to choose from. When you're writing your code, everything you write and everything that is new adhering to AMD is going to be great. It's going to be beautiful. You're not going to have to worry about anything crazy. But it's the other people's stuff that you're going to have to load in particular ways. So like if you're loading jQuery and you have a ton of jQuery plugins, you can't load those asynchronously, because if one of those jQuery plugins gets loaded before jQuery gets loaded, it's going to puke because it can't find jQuery's global object. So in later classes, we will tell you how to write your own jQuery plugins in an asynchronous manner so that we don't have to worry about these things, but it's the existing code we have to worry about.
Can't you just do an order back?
Well, if you know that, then you should be up here. Why are you sitting right there? What did you put down for skill?
I didn't.
Oh, did you sign in?
Yeah.
All right, just checking.
I had to do an order bang because I wouldn't know that word.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Order is a plugin for require.js that allows you to order the files that are loaded asynchronously. So it removes the asynchronous portion of this and it waits for the previous one to be loaded in order to load the next. So, I mean, you lose the asynchronous value of that, but you still gain the benefits of the dependency management. So don't let that stop you. I mean, worst comes to worst, you're loading everything asynchronously as you would just with script tags. But it does force you to take other things into account. Everything is still usable, as far as I'm aware. There's nothing that breaks in a require.js world, but knowing the differences is important. And this is where that new baseline and what our new normal is that these are fun new questions that we're just going to have to solve. It's now that we are in this new world and we have established our baseline, we're not going to back up in order to alleviate some other library's problem. We're going to wedge it into our world because this is the world we're building off of. What time is it? We know a big Q&A portion. Oh no, we're perfect. So, unit testing in JavaScript. This is a fun beast. And incredibly important too, because of the wide variety of environments that you have to be dealing with. Having a very solid and tested foundation is critical, so that when you're adding new code, you don't have to worry about whether or not there's some crazy edge case way down the line that you haven't accounted for, and your entire application is going to break. Your entire application may break still, but your unit test would ideally tell you about that before you deploy your code into production. So, yes?
Okay, I know what BDD is. What is BDD?
Ah, beautiful question. BDD is behavior-driven development. And it is basically, if I am defining it properly according to my brain, it enforces the way you describe tests as opposed to testing each individual piece of code. So it makes you write tests in a way that makes sense, makes logical sense to more than just a developer. So, like, let's say I have a car or something. You would describe a car and its doors should open and shut. You're not writing tests down at a very granular level, like, oh, I'm testing bolt A on whatever else. You're describing an overarching part of your application in a way that you can describe to the product side of your team, to the QA side of your team, to customer support. It's like, oh, I need a test that does blah because a user should be able to post a comment or something like that. They don't need to know about the internals of your application to describe it, and you don't need to change the way you describe and talk about it to somebody else. And we'll get through some examples in just a second. So, well, how do you test right now if you're not unit testing? TDD, by the way, is just test-driven development. For those who didn't know what TDD was, TDD is the line of thought, and I believe that's the one that is the militant focus on writing tests before you write actual code. And I think it's awesome. I think it's also kind of a pain in the ass at times. So I think tests are great. And if you have tests that are run automatically all the time, then you're still doing okay. So testing right now, if you don't do either, and if you don't unit test at all, you probably write your code first, and you know it should probably produce something that you think you know in advance. You go to your browser, you refresh, you verify that that has actually taken place. And if it did, then you move on to the next piece of code. If it doesn't, then you go back to number one, and then you have this cycle until you eventually see that 4. Anyone point drawbacks to that approach? Anyone? You know you do it. What's annoying about it now? Is it slow? It is kind of a pain in the ass to have to go back to your, well, you're gonna have to go back to your browser anyway, but to go back to your browser and actually visually verify something it's a lot of work. I mean, especially if what you're testing is several steps on the page that you're on. So let's say you write a piece of code, you go back to your page, maybe you have to log in, maybe you have to post a comment, or maybe you have to reply to a comment, so you have to have a parent comment first, and testing a reply, and it's a pain in the ass. And it's unscalable because you can only test what you're actively working on right at this moment. There might be numerous pieces that are affected by your code, but the feature that you're particularly working on is what you're actively testing. Unless every time you change a piece of code, you test everything around the site that uses that code, but you know you're not doing that because that's unscalable. And it's a complete waste of our freaking time. We're programmers. Every time we have to do something over and over and over again, we really should realize that there's a problem and this needs to be automated. So automated testing via the numerous libraries, we're using Jasmine. Instead of the previous method and in the TDD format, we write a test first to verify something produces a 4. And this is obviously a contrived example. But what it's basically saying is that you write your test to confirm what you think should happen at the end of the other code you're writing. And by doing that, you ensure, first of all, that you have a working test, because it should fail. I mean, that's part of what you're doing. I mean, you're writing code because it doesn't exist, so the test you're writing should fail first. So then you write your code, and you expect it to produce that 4. You run your test, and then if you have success, then you move on. Failure, you go back to 2, and then you just keep on going over the 2 steps 2 and 3 until you have a successful test. The benefits of this approach are that your tests are saved. When you write a test and you test a feature, the old way that you tested, as soon as you stop testing that, all your work's gone. No one else in your company can run those same tests because they were all manual. the tests that you write in a framework, those are saved so that somebody else can run your test. And that's the important part of automated testing, is that if you have a large team and you are deep in the middle of code and you're writing tests for this code, yeah.
Oh, well, listen, let you finish, but
Yeah, that's right.
definitely write Jasmine unit tests and everything, or BDD tests, whatever. But is there any tools that are like .cover or ncover that identify, you know, uncovered code, like untested code in JavaScript?
So code coverage, what he's talking about is the way to visualize the lines of code in your application that are actually hit by tests. There are code coverage tools for JavaScript. I have not used anyone. There's, I believe, and I may be talking out my ass right now, so anyone correct me or don't quote me on it anyway. Turn the video camera off. There's Esprima, which also might not be pronouncing that properly, but it is a JavaScript code parser that I believe also supports or runs a code coverage tool. And I only use these terms and this understanding based off of the tweets I follow, so I could be completely wrong. But it does exist, and there have been some examples that I have seen which have looked pretty cool. I have not used any. So having other developers run your tests is incredibly important and critical for unit testing, because if you're writing tests and writing code and the other developers on your team aren't running these tests, then you have a maintenance of code and a maintenance of tests problem, because they will eventually invalidate your tests, and then you have to go through and fix those tests, and then it's a mess. But this is my favorite feature of test-driven development and writing tests in general, is that it forces you to actually use your code well before you would normally, but certainly before you would deploy it, before you would provide that code for somebody else, before you would even use that code yourself. If you start writing tests against individual portions, you're going to come across naming issues, like, oh, I actually wanted an array back from this method before that method even exists, so maybe I should have named that method a plural name or something along those lines. It forces you to have small testable pieces of code. You can't write a test in advance for a large chunk of code, because that's just an unreasonable number of tests that you really can't go through before the code is written. So you're going to have individual pieces, and it really, once you get into that habit, you'll be surprised at the size of methods and functions that you've been writing beforehand. I mean, you'll eventually get into the habit where a method or function longer than 15, 20 lines makes you uncomfortable, because there's too much going on, there's going to be too much to test. Yes?
Well, one of the challenges we've had, and where I work at, is integrating it into the CI process. It's easy to have Team City run your unit tests on your server-side code, but we try to use Phantom.js and a couple different approaches. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like a headless browser, and it's just hard to integrate it into the CI process. You have to have the developers manually run them. I was wondering, have any tips or tricks on that?
We'll get to that point. We're structuring our directory structure. We're using Jasmine for a reason. We had everyone install Node for a reason, not just to run a file server. To hopefully, eventually, if we get to this point, start writing the same exact tests in the browser as we run on the command line. So provided we're not doing any crazy GUI testing, then the exact same tests will be runnable via Node and Jasmine on the command line as they are in the browser.
We're stuck in IIS land over there still.
In what? Oh.
Using IIS.
No,
We're not
yeah.
using Node.js.
I don't do that.
It's hard to do that, yeah.
That's just weird.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Where do you work?
Bridgepoint Education.
All right.
So-
I'll stay away from there.
Just one note on that.
Windows and IIS?
So depending on how you unit test, like if you have like a page that you can load to run them.
That's what we try to
You
do.
use something like Selenium to drive it. So actually that's what I did on our project recently, is use Selenium to load that page. That ties in at least to Hudson and some other continuous integration collaboration servers.
We're using Jenkins or
Jenkins,
TeamCity,
yeah.
whatever, nobody
So
has
yeah,
anything.
Jenkins has excellent support for Selenium. So you can use that to run it, parse the output.
I used something similar to that, like QUnit, and Telerik has something similar to Selenium that, like a free, whatever it's called, automation tool like that. But yeah, it's still will seem to be a challenge to get those to fit in as good as the other tests, but we can move on, sorry.
No, that's an excellent example. Selenium is something that definitely can integrate really well. So this is actual Jasmine code. Each individual test is a test specification, test spec, and those are started with the it keyword. We can see that it reads relatively nicely. This is part of the behavior-driven development aspect. It should return a 4. That's just a label that makes it's easy to read, it's easy to describe, and it provides you the valuable feedback in the messages. These are our test suites. We describe something and we list a bunch of things that it should do. So here we are describing some code. You can tell I'm very good at naming right now. Before each, there's also an after each. These are your setups and teardowns for Jasmine. These will run before each one of the test specs and allows you to produce a fresh environment for each one of the specs. So this will give you the ability to set up a variable to initialize some code, and the after each will allow you to break it all down so you're not polluting other tests with bad data. And these are the matchers. These are the actual individual tests that where you're testing for something to happen. So we expect, and this is the sumCode.getValue, which we expect to produce probably a 4. So we expect blah to equal 4. And I think this reads pretty nicely. This is an excellent API. I love Jasmine for a lot of things they do, and the ease of readability is one of them. These are all the matchers that come with Jasmine, and they all read just as nicely, and they're all relatively intuitive. I would hope we don't have to go over many of these. You expect something to be defined or undefined, truthy, falsy, to be null, to contain a regex, be less than, greater than, expect a block to throw an error. And you invert any of them with dot not. So you can do expect blah dot not to equal blah. And it reads really nicely, and it's a joy to program with. You can define your own custom matchers. You can define them in multiple ways. This is within a before each. So we are defining a matcher to go to heaven. We are testing whether or not what we're given has a soul or is a dog. And we can write something like this: expect all dogs to go to heaven. And that's nice. I mean, you write code like that, you don't have to document it. I mean, this is part of the self-documenting code. If you write code that reads like a paragraph, then you shouldn't have comments in there. So you can. This goes into the required JS and Jasmine. You can use Jasmine's provided test matcher to use require in a certain way. We chose to change the way that it works a little bit in order to make it easier for us to maintain our list of source and spec files. Normally the Jasmine test runner, you just include script tags, and then at the end it has a script block, and it'll run it's the simple matcher, simple test something. I don't know. If you're following along, it's the step 5. There's a /test directory. If you go to 127.001:3000/test, step 5 will have broken tests. Step 6 will have passing tests, so you can see Jasmine, how it works and what it describes to you. But in this case, we chose to rewrite what is index.html there, the spec runner, to have 3 arrays of values. The first one is source files. In your traditional Jasmine spec runner, these would be the files you initially preload, and this is the source that you're actually testing. Data files, nothing in there right now, but we're going to use it later. These will be mock data objects, so that we're not actually testing things like APIs. We're not testing things that we really shouldn't be testing. Like that goes back to testing in general, and we'll get to these in later workshops if we find that unit testing is something you need to work on, but you shouldn't be testing, you definitely should not be testing other people's code or other people's APIs. That's something you should just take as a given. They should have their own tests to make sure they're not breaking everyone else's code, so it's not like you're testing, you search Google for blah and you expect results 1, 2, 3 to be blah, blah, blah. So that's where mocking data comes in. So if we needed to test our piece of code that maybe interacts with this API, we would mock up data and then test what we retrieve from there. And the specs are the Jasmine spec files that we just showed. So within the require world, we're requiring the source files and data files. The concat, I just thought looked a little bit prettier than doing it a different way. So we're making sure that all that is required, and then we're requiring the specs, and then we're calling run tests, which is a function defined earlier in the file that actually kicks off Jasmine's test runner. So I mean, that's not too crazy. We just had to change the code that Jasmine provided us in order for it to make more sense to us. And this is something that in the require.js world, we might have to do a little bit. We might have to alter other people's code in order to make it fit better for us. And this is something that we really should be comfortable with. No matter your skill level, you are going to be a lot more skilled if you start getting more comfortable using other people's code. Delve into jQuery, find out how it does the AMD define. Delve into things like backbone _, figure out how it does stuff. Dig into Jasmine. Ideally, throughout the course of the workshops, I would love to really update this and make the Jasmine test runner really awesome in a require.js world, but we're really going to encourage getting our hands dirty. I mean, JavaScript is evolving at a ridiculous pace. You can't always expect to just use what other people provide to you, because you're always going to be 6 months, a year, 2 years behind the leaders. So this is how the test spec did change. All we're doing is requiring math. So this is the contrived math module in steps 5 and 6. We included it here. This is the spec. This is the actual spec file. We're requiring it here. Require with just the string ID right there provides us with the module that it has already previously asynchronously loaded. So it's a little different than what we would normally, or how we would normally write specs, but it's not too crazy. And I mean, that's it. I know we went through a tremendous amount of stuff.
17 minutes?
Yeah. We have written our foundation. There are a lot of things we wanted to touch on, well, we will touch on. Things like backbone, underscore, even stuff like Ember, maybe even Canvas or any other crazy stuff. But this base can be used for a tremendous number of applications. Like, we're not requiring anything that wedges us into a certain type of application. We're going to be using CSS, and no matter what we do on the web. And dependency management is something that we're going to need no matter what. Unit tests is always great. The boilerplate stuff at the start, that's just basic. That really was barely a tool. Bootstrap, just a great addition to allow us to build websites faster. If you jump onto the JavaScriptU GitHub page, you can download or clone the web app-foundation, which will give you the final version, which is not the version, I don't think, that's also in step 6. There might be some changes, and it gets it out of that source. So you can start using it right now. I mean, it's got tests on it, they're running, you can write specs, you can do some jQuery magic. And what to do now. So if you haven't actually downloaded the workshop source, you should. I worked on it, so I want somebody to get some use out of it. But it goes through the steps that we talked about. It goes through HTML5 boilerplate, so if you download the base HTML5 boilerplate from html5boilerplate.com, compare it to our step 1, and you'll get a good idea of what we did customize. Go through the other files in there, see what the fave icon looks like, see what the robots.txt looks like, see how the directories change from piece to piece, see what files got added when, what was necessary, where they went. Check out the documentation. No, most of you probably won't, but it's good. A lot of it's pretty decent reading. Check out the Live Less editor if you want to tweak some stuff, or use the Web App Foundation to start tweaking Bootstrap and see its changes affect your site. Go to a site like bootswatch.com. I don't have it up here, I apologize. It's BOOTSWATCH. It's a few Bootstrap templates that are good examples of how simple changes can really give you a whole new style toolkit to work with. Require.js, I mean, you could use it by just going through what we've learned right now. You might run into some gotchas, and that's where documentation comes in. If you've installed Node, start running the less compiler, see how it actually grabs everything. Our main, I think we called it site.less. It is pretty basic for our site, but it calls an import to bootstrap.less, and you can see how the less compiler grabs all these imports from each of the bootstrap less files and then compresses them down into one CSS, which you can deploy with your production application. jQuery we did not touch on at all. We know that we're probably going to have to touch on it on a larger scale, so we didn't work on it right now. We're planning on getting a bit of jQuery next time, but we still want feedback on a lot of stuff so that we can really tailor the next workshops for you guys. Register for the next workshop. The registration that you guys went to, it was only for workshop 1, so that people could fall out if they wanted to, and we didn't get to workshop 6 with 2 people. So if you found this interesting, if you see it's going to be leading you in a direction that you can fit well in, then sign up tonight. Eventbrite's up, right?
It will be. What I'm going to do is the registration, or the paper that everybody filled out when they came here, I'm going to add that all out, so when it goes live, everybody here will get an email so that you have an opportunity to register first. And that's just because we had an overwhelming response to this class, and as of Sunday, the last time I checked, there was 92 people on the wait list for this class. So with that overwhelming demand, everybody here that showed up, I wanted to get a first try at re-registering again and being part of this next class that you showed up for this first one.
Yeah, so we'll get that out to you within the next day or two, and then you'll have. Well, actually, we should get it out tomorrow, and then we'll have probably till the end of, I'd say, Thursday or something before we open it up to everyone else again, just to give you guys the opportunity to continue on with this class if you found it interesting. But yeah, sign up. And
then you also get the surveys and things like that for today's class. You can tell us what you think, and then give us comments on what you guys want to see in terms of where this workshop is going.
Yeah, and the feedback is really important to all of us, to not only find out what you want to learn, but to know what worked or didn't work well. I mean, this is a learning experience for us. We're trying to do something that none of us have done before. We've spoken on particular talks at San Diego JS, but this organized type of workshop, this is new territory for us. We're going to really try for more interactivity in the next workshops. This one, like I've mentioned a couple times, really just try to just get as much out there as possible so that you guys had a really good understanding as to where we're going and where we're taking off from.
What's the focus for the next workshop?
The next workshop, provided you guys don't already know everything that we've already talked about, and we can't just jump off, we're going to work on jQuery. So unless we get like 30 requests for Backbone or hell WebGL, we're going to go to jQuery.
Yeah, so it's I'm working on a sort of like a focused jQuery, using some of the stuff we did here with integrating required.js and proper plugin writing for jQuery and seeing what the difference is if you're working with required JS and using that sort of environment. So you guys can get a sense of this is what jQuery is like on a standalone thing, and when you want to apply other libraries, this is sort of what it would look like in that situation. And if you guys have any specific ideas for what you want to learn about jQuery, go ahead and send that information to us as well, because with jQuery it's sort of this gigantic thing, and sometimes it can be seen as like I don't write JavaScript, I write jQuery, and some people have that sort of mentality that's so big and so encompassing that we can spend days, an entire series of workshops on just jQuery stuff. So anything that you guys find important or that you want to know more about specifically jQuery, send us an email, and then I'll try to make sure we work everything into the next workshop for that.
We do have an ideal path for where these workshops will go, but again, if you guys are the ones who are going to be coming to each class, it's going to be tailored around what you want. So if everyone wants to learn jQuery back and forth, then we'll focus a lot on jQuery. But if we move on to other things, then we'll do it based off of our feedback. So the feedback, again, is very important, and we'll send that out tomorrow.
Yep.
But thank you very much. I think that's it. Yeah.